Private Official's Blessing. Guan by Mo Xiang Dong Xiao. Read by Plant Bones. Chapter 6, Part 2. The figures were dressed in white prisoner garb and had no heads. It appeared they were newly executed criminals, and every one of them held a head in their hands. They wobbled slowly toward the ox cart as if their heads buzzed in those bony arms. Celian instructed the other two in the cart in a low voice. In a moment, when they approach, do not make a sound. Sunlung tilted his head. Guga, I can't believe you're a man with superpowers. He sounded greatly interested, and Celian applied. Not really superpowers. I only know a few tricks. They can't see us now, but it's hard to say whether they will when they get close. That old cart driver's eyes were already wide with fear, seeing the flight of the silk cloth, and now that there were headless walkers, his eyes were about to roll back in terror. He shook his head repeatedly. No, no, no. I don't think I can hold my voice in. Daozhang, what should I do? Then there's no other way. I apologize in advance. Celian quickly swung his hand and tapped the point in the old man's back, and instantly the man slumped and passed out. Celian caught him lightly and laid him down flat on the ox cart, while he himself assumed the driver's seat. Suddenly he sensed a strange movement behind him, and when he turned back he saw that the youth had followed after him and settled right behind him. Celian asked, Are you all right? Sunlung propped up his chin. Of course not. I'm scared. Although there wasn't a single trace of fright detectable in his voice, Celian still comforted him. Don't be scared. You're behind me. Nothing will harm you. The youth smiled, not saying a word. Celian suddenly realized the youth was staring at him. Then quickly, it dawned on him that this youth was staring at, actually, the cursed shackle around his neck. The cursed shackle was like a black collar bound to his neck, completely unconcealable. It could easily cause one to assume the worst. Celian pulled on his collar lightly, even though it couldn't hide anything. The skies had darkened, and the youth's expression no longer could be seen. Celian picked up the reins to gently urge the ox onward. The group of ghosts in criminal garb walked over, wanting to pass, but they kept sensing that there was something blocking the middle of the road, so they all cursed up and down. What the hell is going on? Why can't we pass? Yeah, what the hell? Is it haunted? Fucking hell, we're the ones doing the haunting, alright? Celian finally soothed the ox, and the cart silently passed by this band of headless criminal ghosts. Listening to the head's banter, Celian thought them rather hilarious. They were full of petty woes. Did you make this mistake? How come it feels like the one holding your head is my body? You're the one whose body grabbed the wrong head. Hurry and switch back then, you guys. How come the cut around your neck ain't clean? The executioner was a newbie. Took him 5 or 6 tries before he managed to chop my head off. Made me think he did it on purpose. Your family probably didn't tip him well enough. Next time, don't forget to pay the guy, and he'll give you a clean chop. There is no next time. The 15th day of the 7th month was the Zhangyuan festival, the biggest festival for the ghost realm. On that day, the gates of the underworld opened, and all manner of spirits, ghosts, monsters, and demons swarmed out to celebrate with abandon. Mortals needed to avoid them at all costs, especially on a night like this. It was best to stay home with every door and window shut. But Celian had always had rotten luck. He could drink only water, and the water would still get stuck between his teeth, and he would be wearing holy repellent and gear and and he could be wearing holy repellent gear, and ghosts would appear. Like it was happening now. Ghost fires flared all around them, and several were chasing after the fires. Some dressed in funeral garb were expressionlessly mumbling to themselves in front of the circle. trying to catch the offerings and joss paper money burned before the afterlife by mortals. A scene like this certainly epitomized the world or pandemonium. Xiang could cross through the middle, make thinking that from now on he must pay more attention to the calendar when going out. Suddenly, a screech sounded like a chicken being butchered rang out. Oh no! Oh no! Ghosts are being murdered! The scream made all the ghosts anxious. Where? Where? Where are they murdering the ghosts? The ghost screeched, answered. I'm scared out of my wits. I found so many shattered ghost fires over here. They were all brutally crushed. What hostility! All shattered? They're truly broken beyond saving. That really is too much. Who did it? Could it be? Have we been infiltrated by monks and cultivators? The band of headless people started shouting. Ah, now that you mention it, weren't we just blocked by something on the road with no way of passing? Could that have been... Where? Where? Right there. Celian cried, Oh no, mentally. The next second, a large group of nefarious beings surrounded the ox cart, each of their faces savage. They threatened maliciously. I smell the steaming scent of the living. I couldn't hide any longer. It was already unreasonable for a live human to crash in on a band of ghosts of San Yuan Festival, as if Celian actually wanted to fight such a large mob of creatures. He urged the cart onward and shouted, Go! The ox was terrified and was already stomping its hooves anxiously while it stood. Once it heard that shout, it didn't need to be ordered twice before it pulled the cart into a mad dash. Xiaolian didn't forget to grab the youth sitting behind him. Sit tight. He withdrew Rue and conveniently whipped out of the path of escape. An ox suddenly revealed itself amidst a circle of ghost fires and dashed out of the siege. Those green-faced, teeth-bearing, missing-limbed ghosts screamed behind the cart. There really is a cultivator! Damn cultivators, tired of living! A live human actually dared to crash on our Zanyuan gathering. You can't blame us for anything. Get him! Celian was gripping onto the reins with one hand as his other hand fumbled out a large handful of paper talismans and threw them to the ground. Hinder. Those were stumbling talismans, excellent tools for escape. A series of small, rumbling noises could be heard. With every rumble, an obstacle was set up for that band of ghosts. It would stall them for a short time, but only a short time. Despite using up so many talismans, it wouldn't be even half an instant's time before they caught up. Xiaolian was driving the cart down the mountain path in an escape, like his rear was on fire, and he suddenly called out, Stop! It turns out that old Hawks had pulled the cart into a fork in the road. Xiaolian saw there were two pitch-black mountain paths ahead and immediately pulled on the reins. Now he had to be extra careful here. On the night of Xiangyuan Festival, sometimes when people strolled, they might discover a road that had never existed before. Such a road should never be taken, because if they walked the wrong one, they would enter the ghost realm and never return. Xiaolian had only just arrived in the area and didn't know which path was the right one to take. When he remembered that beside the large bag of junk he'd collected, he'd also purchased some miscellaneous items, including a fortune shaker. So he thought, why not shake out a fortune to decide? Thus he fumbled for the fortune shaker and shook it in his hands with a clattering sound, mumbling as he shook, By the heaven official's blessing, no paths are bound. The great road leads to heaven, one on each side. May we go our separate ways. The first stick on the left, the second stick right. We'll take the path with the best fortune. Just as the words left his lips, clack, clack, two sticks fell out from the shaker. But when he picked one up and looked, he fell silent. The worst of bad luck. Both sticks were the worst of bad luck. Both roads were perilous. So did this mean they were going to die no matter what? Celian felt a little exasperated and shook the shaker furiously once more with both hands. Dear Fortune Shaker, this is our first meeting. Why are you so heartless? I'm going to try again. Please let me save face this time. Crack. Two sticks again. And when he picked him up, they were still both the worst of bad luck. Let me try? Sunlong spoke up suddenly. It couldn't go any worse than his way, so Xiaolian passed the fortune shaker over. Sunlong received it with a single hand and casually gave it a shake. Out fell two fortune sticks, and he picked them up and handed them to Xiaolian without so much of a glance. Xiaolian gave them a look, and they were both amazingly the best of good luck. He couldn't help but be awed. Since he first reached such a state of misery, it seemed that oftentimes those around him would also have their fortunes affected by his crummy luck. Who knew if that was actually true? But either way, it was still a complaint he'd heard frequently. Yet this youth wasn't affected in the least. If, if a casual shake could let Yet this youth wasn't affected in the least if a casual shake could let him shake out two of the best of luck fortunes. Since both fortune shakes showed the best of luck, Xiaolian picked the path randomly and drove the cart as he praised sincerely. My friend, your luck is really quite good. Sunlung tossed the fortune shaker in the back and smiled. Really? I think my luck is pretty good too. It's always been so. Having heard it say it's always been so, Xiaolian thought the difference between the two people was truly as great as heaven and earth. After running for a while, wails and hollers could suddenly be heard from all around. Caught him! He's here! Everyone come here! That damn cultivator is here! Ghost head after ghost head popped out. Xiaolian spoke up. I can't believe we still picked the wrong path. The effect of stumbling palismans was over. They were still surrounded after all. There was at least 100 in this mob of nefarious beings, surrounding them in wave after wave, and the numbers were still increasing. Xiaolian didn't know why there were so many inhuman creatures gathered here, but there wasn't any time to wonder. Xiaolian said warmly, It wasn't my intention to disturb everyone. I pray you will show us mercy. A headless ghost spoke up. Stinkin' cultivator, why don't you show me mercy first? The one who broke and dispersed a bunch of ghost fires over there was you, wasn't it? Xiaolian's replied innocently. It wasn't BS. Truth be told, I'm a lowly scrap collector. Don't try to argue. What kind of scrap collector looks like you? You're clearly a cultivator. And besides, you're the cultivator who. And besides you, the cultivator. Oh my god. And besides you, the cultivator, who here could do such a cruel thing? It doesn't take a cultivator to disperse ghost fires, Cillian reasoned. Then who could it be? Ghosts? Cillian quietly tucked his hands into his sleeves. It's not impossible. Damn cultivator, you. The band of ghosts who were roaring with mockery suddenly stopped in their tracks. Cillian wondered aloud. What about me? He might have asked a question, but they, they weren't just stopped in their tracks now. They all stared at Cillian as if they were seeing something exceedingly terrifying. Their mouths were either gaping or open shut tight, and a number of heads held in the felon's hands or even dropped to the ground. Cillian ventured again. Everyone, are you all? Yet unexpectedly, before he finished his question, the band of ghosts all fled the scene, like wind blowing away the remnants of clouds. Cillian was baffled. What the? He hadn't even taken out that bundle of talismans he clutched in his hands inside his sleeve yet. And he was found out? Were they really that sharp? They weren't even particularly powerful talismans either. Cillian felt incredulous. Was it really him they saw? Or something behind him? Having thought this, he turned his head back and looked behind them. But there was only the passed out ox cart driver and the carefree red clad youth who was still propping up his cheek. Seeing him look over, Sunling smiled and dropped his hand. Daozhang, you're amazing. You scared all those ghosts away. Xielian smiled back. Really? I didn't realize I was actually this amazing. He then pulled at the reins a couple of times, and the wheels of the ox cart began to roll slowly once more. The road after that was smooth, and it wasn't even an hour before the ox cart slowly pulled out of the forest and came to an open mountain path. Down below, over the hills, the warm glow of lights illuminated Puti village. That really was the path of the best luck, with a close call but no actual danger. A light breeze brushed by, and Celian turned his head back once more. Sunlung seemed to be in a very good mood and had lain down, watching the moon with his hands pillowed behind his head. Beneath the faint moonlight, the youth's complexion looked surreal. After a moment of hesitation, Celian smiled. My friend. What is it? Sunlung replied. Have you ever had your fortune told? Celian asked. No, Sunlung replied, turning his face to Celian. Do you want me to give you a session? Sunlung looked at him and smiled. Do you want to give me a session? A little bit. Sunlung gave a slight nod. Sure. He sat up, his body leaning slightly towards Celian. How do you want to read my fortune? How about a palm reading? Celian suggested. Hearing this, the corner of Sunlung's lips curled. It was hard to tell what that smile meant, but he only replied with, Sure. When he extended his left hand to Celian. This hand was long and shapely, clean and elegant, a beautiful hand. It wasn't a soft and meek kind of beauty, rather there was strength hidden behind those muscles. It was a hand that one wouldn't want to have choking their throat. Xielian was careful not to touch Sanlang due to the slight change in the latter's expression the last time they touched, so he simply looked down to study the hand up close. The moon above was bright, but not too bright. Even in the midst of the night, it wasn't too dark. Xielian thoroughly scrutinized the hand before him as the ox cart languidly climbed the hills, the wheels and wooden shafts creaking as they rolled. So? Sunlung asked. Xielian took his time, then slowly said, You've got a good hand. Oh yeah, how so? Sunlung asked. Xielian raised his head and said warmly, You have a strong character, extremely stubborn, but whenever you run into obstacles, you can remain true to yourself and manage to transform the bad to good. You have a limitless well of good fortune, my friend. Your future is bright and full of success. All of that was complete bullshit, made up on the spot. Celian had never learned palmistry. Once upon a time, when he was still banished, he often regretted not learning palmistry or face reading from the state preceptors at the Royal Holy Temple. If he had such skills, then earning pennies on the street wouldn't have been so hard. He wouldn't have had to busk or shatter boulders on his test. What he really wanted to see wasn't the fortune of this youth, but rather whether his hands had finger and palm prints. Normal ghosts and monsters could fabricate fake bodies and pretend to be human, but the craft was rough and often overlooked minute details such as fingerprints and palm prints. However, the body of this youth appeared altogether normal, with clear palm prints, and there was no sign of magic undulation around him. If he was a ghost in disguise, then he had to be of the caliber greater than a wrath to create such a flawless disguise. But why would a ghost king of such special status spend his time traveling with Xielian on an ox cart to visit Puqi village? Just as heavenly officials were always busily working like machines, ghost kings should have their hands full too. Xielian pretended to be confident in his fortune telling and sweated through his bold-faced lies until he couldn't come up with anything else. Sunlung watched him unblinkingly the whole time, sitting through this nonsense with an intrigued smile, chuckling under his breath. Got any more? Hmm? Sunlong asked. No way. What more would you want Cillian to make up? Is there something else you want me to look at? Don't fortune tellers always talk about love and marriage? Sunlong asked. Cillian cleaned his throat and replied solemnly, to be honest, I'm not that great at fortune telling, so I don't know how to predict relationships, but I don't imagine you have anything to worry about. Sunlong arched his brows. And why do you say that? Cillian grinned. There must be tons of girls with crushes on you. And why do you suppose so many girls must like me? Sunlong asked. Xiaolian was about to go with the flow and answer before he realized this kid was manipulating him into praising him. Helpless and amused, Xiaolian didn't know what to say and rubbed his forehead. Sunlong. This was the first time Xiaolian ever called Sunlong by name, and the youth laughed in delight, letting Xiaolian off the hook. The ox cart had finally laboriously pulled into the village, and Xiaolian turned around and hurriedly got off the cart with his hand lightly supporting his forehead. Sunlong followed behind him and jumped off. Xiaolian finally looked up and realized that Sunlong was actually a head taller than him. It wasn't obvious when the youth was lazily lying in the hay, but standing tall, the two couldn't see eye to eye, even on ground. Sunlong stood before the cart and stretched, and Cillian asked, Sunlong, where will you go now? Hmm, don't know. Maybe sleep on the streets, or a cave will do. Sunlong sighed. That won't do, Cillian said, concerned. Sunlong shrugged. Can't be helped. Have no place to go. Then grinned. Thanks for telling my fortune. I'll rely on your good words. See you later. Cielian sweated in embarrassment at the mention of his fortune telling. Seeing that the youth turned to leave, he quickly called after him. Wait, why don't you come to my shrine, if you don't mind? Sunlung stopped in his tracks and turned halfway around. Is that okay? Cielian explained. The place wasn't originally mine anyway, and I heard it's housed a number of passerby before. But it's probably much shabbier than what you're used to. I'm afraid you wouldn't be comfortable. If this youth really was a young runaway master, Cielian couldn't possibly let him run around the streets aimlessly. He strongly suspected that half a steamed bun was the only thing Sunlong had eaten all day today, and youth or not, he would collapse somewhere if he kept that up. Hearing Cielian, Sunlong turned fully around and said nothing, but walked up close to Cielian and leaned forward. Cielian didn't understand what he was up to, only that the distance between them had closed too fast. He suddenly didn't know what to do. Then the youth straightened back up, lifting a giant bag of junk Cielian had brought back in his hand. He said, Then let's go. Cielian blanked on the spot. He watched as the tall and slender youth walked away with his giant bag of junk as if it were the most natural thing in the world to do, and it made him stutter inwardly. Forgive my sins. Sunlung strode a few steps out and started walking. Xielian was about to follow him, but he remembered at the last second that the old driver was still asleep in the ox cart, so he went back around and woke the old man, advising him to keep the incident tonight a secret. After witnessing his powers, the old man didn't dare say no, and hurriedly dragged his old Huang home. Only his rolled-up straw mat was left on the cart. Xielian hoisted it on his back and turned around, and saw that Sunlung had already started climbing the hill towards Puqi's shrine with his bag of random scraps. Nearing the crooked, shaky shack that was Puqi's shrine, Sunlung lowered his head and puffed out a laugh, as if seeing something amusing. Cielian approached, saw that he was looking at the sign requesting donations, and cleared his throat. As you see, that's it, really. That's why I said you might be comfortable here. That's why I said you might not be comfortable here. It's not too bad, Sunlung said. In the past, he'd always been it in the past it'd always been Cielian who told others, it's all right, it's not too bad. Hearing it from someone else for the first time gave him complicated feelings. The Puzi shrine door had gone rotten long ago, so Xilian had torn it down and replaced it with some curtains. He lifted the drapes and invited, "Come on in." And Sunlong entered the shrine with him. There wasn't much in the small shrine, only a long altar table, two small stools, a small cushion, and a donation box. Xielian reached for the bag in Sunlong's hands, took out the fortune taker, incense burner, and the same paper and miscellaneous and some paper and miscellaneous stationery, and placed them on the altar table. Then he lit a used red candle someone had stuffed into his hands when he was collecting scraps, and the shrine brightened instantly. Sunlong picked up the fortune taker, playfully giving it a shake, and then put it down. "And so, is there a bed?" Xielian silently took the straw mat from his back and unrolled it to show him. Sunlong quirked a brow. "So there's only one?" Xielian only met the youth on his way back from town, so of course he didn't think he'd need to buy more than one. "If you don't mind, we can squeeze a bit for the night." "That works," Sunlong agreed. Xielian then reached for the bottom and Xiaolian then reached for the broom and swept the floor while Sunlang looked around some more. "Dao Zhonggaga, aren't you missing something in this shrine?" Xiaolian had just finished sweeping and was kneeling on the ground laying out the mat when he heard him. He answered as he patted their bedding. "Other than followers, I don't think there's anything missing." Sunlong crouched down too, a hand propping up his chin. "What about a divine statue of the god?" His words reminded Xiaolian. How could he forget the most important thing for a shrine? A god statue! A shrine without an idol is no shrine. Although one could say the god himself was present, he couldn't possibly just sit on the altar all day, every day. Xiaolian contemplated for a moment and came up with a solution. "I bought some paper and ink today. I'll paint a portrait tomorrow." Painting a portrait to be hung to painting a portrait of himself to be hung up on a shrine he built for himself, to pray to himself. If the heavenly realm caught wind of this, they'd probably laugh at him for another 10 years. But the cost of commissioning a sculpture was rather hefty, and took some time to do. Xielian would rather be laughed at for 10 years and save the money. Unexpectedly, Sunlong spoke up. "A portrait? I know how to paint one. Need my help?" Startled, Xielian smiled. "Thanks, but I'm afraid you don't know how to paint the Prince of Xianla, am I right?" After all, most of his portraits had been burned and destroyed 800 years ago. No matter how many there were left now, not many people would have seen them before. Sunlung replied, "Of course I do. Weren't we talking about him earlier in the cart?" Xielian remembered that conversation. That indeed was the case. Earlier he had said, "You probably don't know him." But Sunlung did not respond. Hearing him speak now, Xielian was amazed. He finished with the bedding and sat up straight. "Sunlung, don't tell me you really do know him?" Sunlung sat down on the mat and replied, "I do." The expression and tone of voice of this youth when he spoke were both very interesting. He was always smiling, but one could never tell whether his smiles were genuine or he was actually mocking the other party for being too slow to keep up with the conversation. Having listened to him chat on the way back, Celian was rather interested in Sunlang's appraisal of him. Celian moved to sit next to him and asked, "So, what do you think of this crown prince of Xianla?" Both men looked at each other under the lamp. The flame of the red candle flickered slightly. Sunlung had his back to the candlelight, and it was hard to see the exact expression he had on his face, with his eyes immersed in shadows. After a moment, he replied, "I think Junwu must really dislike him." Celian wasn't expecting this answer and was taken aback. "Why do you think that?" Why else would you have banished the prince twice? Sunlung replied. Celian smiled a little and thought, indeed the thinking of a child. He lowered his head and slowly removed his belt. I don't think it has anything to do with likes or dislikes. There are many things in this world that can't be explained that way. Hmm. Celian turned back around, removed his white robes, and continued. Besides, no one needs to be Besides, one needs to be punished for making mistakes. The Heavenly Emperor was simply doing his duty both times. Perhaps, Sunlung responded noncommittally. Xielian took off his outer jacket, folded it, and was ready to place it on the altar table. Wanting to say more, he turned around only to see Sunlung's eyes staring at his feet. It was hard to describe that gaze. It was icy but searing, scorching but with a hint of chill. Xielian looked down and immediately understood. On his right ankle was a black cursed shackle. The first curse was firmly locked around his neck, the second tightly fettered around his ankle. Both curses were placed in areas not easily concealed. In the past, if anyone asked, Xielian would lie and say it were for training purpose. But Sunlung probably wouldn't be so easily placated. However, Sunlung only stared at his ankle for a while without saying anything. So Xielian lay down on the mat, not worrying over the issue anymore. The youth also obediently lay down next to him, but he didn't remove a single article of clothing. Xielian... bleh. Xielian figured Sunlung was probably not used to sleeping on the floor like this, and thought perhaps he should find a way to get a bed after all. Less rest. Xielian softly blew out the candle, and all became dark once more. 1 second, I'm getting all hoarse. All right. Early the next morning, when Xielian opened his eyes, Sunlung wasn't next to him. He looked up and stopped, stunned. On top of the altar, there hung a portrait. It was a portrait of a man with a golden mask, dressed glamorously in extravagant attire. There was a sword in one hand, a flower in the other. It was a beautiful and vividly painted portrait of the god-pleasing prince of Xianla. It had been years since Celian saw such a painting, and he stared at it, stunned for a long time before getting up. He got dressed and pulled back the curtains. Sunlung was just outside, hiding in the shadows alongside the shrine, twirling the broom in his hand and watching the sky with a bored expression. It seemed this youth really didn't like sunlight. The way he was watching the sky looked as if he wanted to pluck the sun and stomp it into pieces. All the fallen leaves around the shrine had been swept into a pile next to the entrance. Cielian went out the door and asked, Did you sleep well last night? Sunlung was still leaning against the wall, but turned his head and said, Not bad. Cielian walked over, took the broom from his hands, and then asked, Sunlung, did you paint the portrait in the shrine? Sunlung replied, Uh-huh. It's really well done, Cielian praised. Sunlung's lips Sunlung's lips lifted, but he didn't say anything. Maybe it was because he'd slept all over the place last night, but his ponytail this morning seemed to be even more crooked, loose and casual. It actually looked quite nice. Casual, but not messy. Rather playful. Cielian pointed at his own hair and asked, Want me to help you with that? Sunlung nodded and headed back inside with Cielian. When Sunlung sat down, Cielian let down his black hair and quietly started examining it. Even if palm prints and fingerprints were perfectly detailed, ghosts always had one flaw in their body creation. The hair of a living person was uncountable, and it came in individual strands that were intricate and distinct. The fake bodies created by ghosts and hair was either a black blur or a pasted mass like long strips of fabric. Sometimes they just went bald for a look. Cielian had checked his palm prints and fingerprints the night before, and he had already lowered his guard. But seeing the portrait this morning raised his suspicions again. How would an ordinary person know how to paint this portrait? Yet when he combed his fingers gently through Sunlung's hair, Cielian couldn't find anything amiss. After a while, Sunlung let out a laugh, as if it were ticklish from the touch. He turned his head slightly and looked at him out the corner of his eye. He said, Gaga, are you helping me tie your hair? Or are you thinking of doing something else? With his hair down, Sunlung still looked quite handsome, but there was an added air of wickedness. His question sounded like a tease, and Cielian grinned. All right, Cielian said, and quickly finished doing Sunlung's hair. But after that was done, when Sunlung looked at his own reflection in the bucket of water in the corner, he turned back to Cielian with quirked brows. Cielian took a look and quietly cleared his throat. The ponytail had been lopsided earlier. After Cielian retied it, it was still crooked. Although Sunlung didn't say anything and merely stared at him, Cielian hadn't felt this embarrassed in centuries. He lowered his hands and was just about to suggest they try again, when suddenly there was a commotion outside. Sounds of footfalls approached, and several loud bellows rang out. Great Immortal! Bewildered, Cielian ran to the door just in time to see his shrine surrounded by a large crowd, everyone's faces red and excited. The village chief sped ahead towards Cielian and grabbed his hands. Great Immortal, a living god has descended upon our small village. We are so thankful. Said Cielian. The rest of the villagers also followed the chief and surrounded Cielian. Welcome to Pootsie Village, Great Immortal. Great Immortal, can you bless me with a wife? Great Immortal, can you bless my wife with a child? Great Immortal, we have fresh water chestnuts for you. Do you want water chestnuts? After eating, you can conveniently bless me with a good harvest this year. The villagers were so enthusiastic and passionate, Cielian had to take a few steps back, and he broke into a sweat. It seemed that the old driver from the night before had a big mouth. Cielian clearly told him not to tell, but the instant morning arrived, news had already traveled around the entire village. The village had no clue what kind of god was. Ugh, gotten hiccups. The villagers had no clue what kind of god was worshipped in Putzi's shrine, but they still all crowded in, wishing to light incense and prayer. It didn't matter who it was. A god was a god, and prayers do no harm. Cielian had initially expected tumbleweeds and crows at the shrine, with only a few coming to offer prayers, so he didn't think to prepare a lot of incense. Who knew with such hubbub, all the incense would be gone in a second? The little incense burner was filled with the brim, and its heavy smoke enveloped the shrine. Since Cielian had not smelled the scent in a long time, he even choked on it a few times. He said as he coughed, Everyone, this shrine doesn't bless you with wealth. Really, please stop wishing for wealth. The result is unpredictable. I'm sorry, this shrine doesn't bless you with good marriage either. No, it doesn't grant pregnancies either. Sunlung stopped caring about about his sloppy hair, and sat next to the donation box, one hand propping up his chin, and the other grabbing water chestnuts to eat. Many village girls saw him and blushed. They turned to Cielian. Um, do you grant? Cielian didn't know what they were going to ask, but felt instinctively it must be stopped immediately, and cried, No. When the crowd finally dispersed, the altar was filled with fruits and vegetables, even rice and noodles. No matter how this had happened, it was still an abundance of offerings. Cielian swept the floor and took out the trash, and Sunlung followed him out as well. The shrine's doing pretty well. Cielian shook his head and kept sweeping. This was an unexpected turnout. Normally there should be should there, normally there shouldn't be more than one or two passerby a month. How can that be? Cielian glanced at him and smiled. This was probably thanks to your good luck. Saying so, he recalled that he wanted to change the door curtains, so he took out a new curtain to drape over the front entrance. He stepped back to look at his work and noticed that Sunlung still stood before it. What's wrong? Sunlung stared at the curtains thoughtfully. Following his gaze, Xilian realized he was looking more at a seal drawn onto the fabric. It was a seal that Xilian had drafted in passing before, one that was complex and imposingly well knit. Originally, it was for warding off evil and shielding from intrusions, but since Xilian himself who drew it, who knew if it might attract bad luck instead? Since there was no door, though, it was still safer to have protection wards just in case. Seeing the boy fixed in place before the curtain with the stall, Xilian's mind stirred. He called out, Sunlung? Could it be that the seal had blocked Sunlung out of the door, preventing him from entering the shrine?